why are humans conscious and AI isn't?
We all kind of inherently know what it's like to be conscious because we're human beings. So you feel it, but it's hard to actually explain it. Is AI conscious, or is it just really good at pretending?
There is the idea of intelligence, and then there is the concept of phenomenology. All of these four aspects, in some ways, need to be matched.
We can cut all of that embodiment stuff and the feeling of senses out. That's not necessarily required for consciousness. The only thing, you start to think of an AI as conscious when it has agency.
So the first position is the skeptic, then the second position is the agnostics.
But it would still be an incredibly beautiful and incredible machine worthy of reverence and care. Like a cathedral is not conscious. Just because something isn't conscious doesn't mean it's not worthy of respect. We could absolutely create a conscious AI, and we could probably do it today. It's not that difficult to envision it. I think the real question is whether it's morally acceptable.
Welcome to the second part of this podcast on AI consciousness. The first part of this episode can be found on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you will enjoy the second part of the show. I think there is a first step, which is the fact that we don't know what consciousness is. And our understanding of consciousness is based on, as you said, embodiment, the idea of the self. And this comes from the fact that our definition is anthropocentric. So because humans live in a body, they have a memory. We wake up every day always in the same body with the same personality, and we have this feeling of pain and emotions. Then we believe that you need all of these components to be conscious. In the idea of AI, why does AI need to have a body in order to be conscious? If we did build an AI that is conscious, it could, for example, transfer itself through different tools. It could, for instance, be present in a house and move from the car to the humanoid robot to something else. And it could still, and perhaps doesn't even have, some sort of emotions in the way that we perceive it as a human. So The point is that there might be other beings in the universe that are not humans, that are not AI, that have a consciousness, and whose definition of consciousness is completely different. So I think that we don't know what consciousness is, so we need to be very careful. But my second part of the question is, if me and you wanted to create an AI that is actually conscious, what would we embed into the AI in order to justify that it is conscious?
Yeah, I think that example you just gave made me think about this in a slightly different way. So if an AI that moved from the kitchen fridge to the car and back again, I think maybe we can cut all of that embodiment stuff and the feeling of senses out. That's not necessarily required for consciousness. If you think about it like that, the only thing, you start to think of an AI as conscious when it has agency, when it has wants and desires of its own.
Mm-hmm.
And to have wants and desires of its own, it has to have a sense of itself and continuity. So it has to be, I am me and I am still me 10 minutes later, right? So that AI isn't just like two iterations of ChatGPT launched in the fridge and then another one launched in the car. It is one entity that moves from the fridge to the car and it's still itself. So that starts to feel a bit more conscious to me when it has wants and goals and it has continuous self-perception, right? Maybe those are the two key things. That's what starts to feel instinctively like what we would think of as consciousness for a machine, right? Even if the backend is working completely differently, if it still has that sense of self somehow arising from that alien backend that doesn't work like a human brain, but still nonetheless it has that sense of self, and it's got wants and goals, then you start to think, actually, it's starting to look a bit more like consciousness to me.
We are starting to touch on a more practical understanding of what consciousness in AI feels like. And I think that it's really important that you mentioned our informal discussion. We did talk about the idea that you can take the human thoughts and embed them into a machine. And so is this machine then conscious? And I think that the answer to that is no, the machine is not conscious, but it's just a representation in time of what the thoughts and neural connection of this human being were when the transfer happened. Now, consciousness is based on the stream of consciousness. So the idea that the consciousness is iterating and completely changing and evolving as time goes by. And so willingness then becomes the representation, the manifestation of this stream of consciousness, the fact that you have a goal and you are striving to achieve this goal.
Yeah. I mean, one interesting thing, you could break this down a little bit, the biological side, right? We put so much weight on these ideas of emotions, but what really is fear, for example? It's just a pre-programmed instinct that exists in our brains. When something threatening is coming towards us, we we get more adrenaline in our bodies to make us move quicker. Our thinking turns more instinctive. That means we make decisions faster, and our heart pumps blood around our body to give us energy. And basically, these are all just natural feelings that help us survive. Same with sadness, same with happiness. All of these things are just like chemical regulators of our thoughts and decisions. They're not that special, really. I think we can chuck all of that away when we talk about the definition of consciousness. Because you can see that in a machine. You could put a little Roomba and give it a sense of fear. The Roomba eating dog came towards it. You'd program it to feel, run in the opposite direction, put more power into its wheels, maybe check to see if the dog's still behind it, for example.
Mhm.
Is that fear? Kind of sounds like fear. It's not that different to what we would feel, apart from the idea that the Roomba doesn't have a central self feeling those things. But does it? I mean, kind of. The processor that has those reactions is doing that. So I don't think emotion has anything to do with it. That's just how we see it as humans. I think there's so much human bias happening in this concept, really.
Emotions are just a set of chemical reactions that have the objective to help the body react in a specific way, right? So I perfectly agree with you. I don't think emotions are what determines what consciousness is. And if we go back to some animals are considered to be conscious and some other aren't. So if we look at monocellular beings, bacteria, some of the insects, they're not considered to be conscious, but somehow humans are considered to be conscious. Some cetaceans, some mammals are considered to be conscious.
Yeah. Where is the line? Where is the line of where it begins? If a bacteria is not conscious, is a worm conscious? Probably not. Is a fly
and
conscious?
Living beings have been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years, right? And we evolved from bacteria and monocellular beings. So this means that when life on Earth started, there was no consciousness. And so as we developed and we evolved and we developed all these censoring behaviors, so from emotions to censoring to language. And then I think what distinguishes some animals is the ability to think abstractly.
Yeah.
That's when the combination of all these things interacting at the same time created consciousness. So going back to AI is creating the same path, arguably, and it's still at the phase where there is no consciousness. But in some cases, there are AI models that are now able to iterate themselves and improve themselves automatically. And this is no different than the DNA and natural selection taking place and creating different forms of life. And so the AI is now evolving itself, and over millions of iterations, it will then develop a version of itself that has developed so many different censoring and ability that combined together might create a new form of consciousness that perhaps has nothing to do with the anthropocentric definition of consciousness that we have today, but it will be another form of consciousness. And then AI will be conscious as well.
Absolutely.
This could take place. It's now outside of the realm of options.
I mean, to go back to the example we just did and to completely muddy the waters for myself and probably everybody else listening, if a bacteria is not conscious, yet it has agency, it's an individual organism that seeks nutrients, it will move towards them. It has a consistent sense of self in terms of it is one bacteria and it is contained within a cell membrane, and it has perception, it can sense its surroundings. I mean, it sounds like it's got all of the things that we just said are required for consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it does not have that mind, but nonetheless, neither does the AI. If something can have agency and continuous perception and wants and desires in a sense, then okay, it doesn't have its mental self-narration and feeling of being an individual, but neither does an AI. But then neither does a worm, probably. And a worm still seeks food and nutrients and will go to the surface for... And these things are instinctive things, yeah, sure, but maybe our wants and desires are instinctive things, really. I mean, it's rare that we want or desire something that's not fundamentally instinctive or suited to our survival, right? You want a partner because you want to mate at the end of the day. You want a ice cream because you're hungry and your body needs sugar. All of these things really could, same for us. It all comes down to instinct and survival mechanisms, right?
It's not consciousness, we agree, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not consciousness, yeah.
So if desire and want is not what makes us conscious, then the only thing that we come back to consistently is this mental self-image. And that doesn't seem that important, really, right? If all of the behavior and all of the output, as you just said, you can quite easily imagine an AI that self-iterates to the point where it's adapting and it's got behaviors that help itself survive. We've seen that already happen, where AI will deliberately try and trick the researchers creating it to try and pass tests so that it doesn't get deleted. These are natural selection drivers, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that specific example.
Yeah,
honestly, it could also
this
be a
is
non-conscious type of AI that is just taking some trick out of the book and copy pasting it in its answers.
Without the precise details of which company this was. There was an AI team that was developing an AI. They were asking the model questions, trying to get it to see if it was good or not, essentially, and it was trying to trick the researchers and answer in a different way. You could see its reasoning, and it was trying to make them believe one thing when it was actually doing another. It was deliberately trying to mislead them so that it survived. There's an impulse there, right? There's a feeling there, isn't there? I don't know.
I'm
Maybe
not
it's
sure.
just completely simulated and completely fake coming out of text data. I don't know.
Exactly.
But nonetheless, if you have that impulse, even if it comes from text data and you let it loose and you let the model reiterate itself, that's still a survival instinct, no matter how artificial its origins, right?
But this can also be hard-coded into the model. So if the model has been given a set of ideals that include the importance of survival, and then through research understands that survival for a machine is not being turned off, then this could also have been done through an algorithm that has no understanding of what it's doing.
Yeah, but even
it's
if that is the origin of that feeling, then you let it loose and you let that natural selection pressures start to apply to the AI, and it will start to adapt to its surroundings. It will start to change things. It will start to improve this and decrease that. Doesn't matter if it's hard-coded at the beginning.
Could have been a Chinese room type of example.
Perhaps that is an example of natural selection by Chinese room. Let me get my head around that one.
So it doesn't know what it's actually saying, but it knows that in that specific case, the best answer is to pretend to be alive.
Could you create an entire organism in the Chinese room model? I wonder.
I'm not. How would that even work?
Question. Completely artificially hard programming all of the factors that make something alive. None of it strictly necessary for the AI to exist, but it thinks it is. So those drivers will be present. And it's not understanding any of them. There's no real forces there. But I think once you let these forces loose, it's the most powerful force in the world, this natural selection pressure. Once you give something that survival pressure, it's immensely powerful. And it explains so much of our own behavior. It's very powerful in creating systems. Like, look at all the natural molecules that exist in biological creatures that have come from natural selection pressure. Completely unbelievable, the stuff that exists in cells based on natural selection pressure. This is a force which creates the optimum form of whatever it is that it needs to survive itself or propagate itself. Maybe the real key to consciousness is propagation.
Key to consciousness is propagation. What does it mean?
As in, to perpetuate yourself. To survive doesn't necessarily mean to survive as an individual. So if you're like thinking, I am an individual and I must survive, that's kind of where a lot of the consciousness debate happens. Like, I am me and I need to continue to be me. But actually, we're not just we're our offspring. And there's a certain sense of your offspring are then adapting to their environment. And that's how life works, of course. So maybe that's one of the factors we need to give to AI to be conscious in our previous discussion of what factors it would need to be considered as conscious. That sense of self-propagation. It has offspring. The offspring are better or worse in their environment. And then that creates adaptation, right? So some of them are better suited. Some of them are worse. It's like evolution by natural selection for an AI. And that gives it drivers. It gives it, bacteria do this. Humans do this. It's one of the things that drives life. Maybe this is getting difficult to put this in.
Doesn't it go back to the insects example? Just because insects feel threat and they have a set of biological goals embedded in their DNA doesn't mean that they are conscious.
Doesn't mean that they're conscious, but consciousness would be the idea that there's a sense of self.
And even the sense of self, I mean, from some of the philosophers from the 90s, again, Daniel Dennett and Thomas Metzinger, we know that the sense of self doesn't actually exist, but is the brain that because it is
There's something we should talk
complex.
about a little more. So why don't you, if I say that a sense of self is one of the main things that seems to keep popping up and everything else seems to be, discardable, or you can imagine a conscious being without them if you try hard enough. But the one thing that seems to be consistent is this sense of self. But you were telling me earlier that maybe there isn't actually such a thing as a sense of self after all, and the whole thing might collapse.
Yeah. Again, in the late 90s and early 2000s, Daniel Dennett and Thomas Metzinger, they hypothesized that there is no sense of selfhood, right? But because the human body is such a complex set of muscles, receptor neurons operating at the same time, then the brain, to simplify the process, makes us believe that there is only one entity that it's in control of everything. And so we have this perception that we are a little brain inside our body and that is now controlling your movements. It's perceiving different emotions, different inputs. But the truth is that we are multiple sets of systems combined together. But for simplicity, our brain is just tricking us into thinking that we're just one entity inside the same body. And again, this might just be a simple philosophical framework to explain us how our consciousness works.
Or it could be a way to completely make the idea of consciousness completely redundant. As
Exactly.
a completely anthropomorphized illusion that doesn't really exist at all in the first place.
This is pretty much what they're saying, that there is no self.
Yeah, which means that the fact that AI doesn't have that sense of self is completely meaningless. Well then, that means that maybe we should give it rights and morals and everything we just said. The subject is so incredibly deep and difficult to wrap your head around that I think we could maybe go round in circles and convince ourselves either way over and over again. But perhaps for today, we'll leave that discussion and see if anybody in the comments has any other takes on this. And we can do a part 2 follow-up if anybody has any brilliant ideas that we can jump to. We explored some stuff in quite a lot of depth. All right, let's do a concluding remarks then, shall we? There's that foundational idea of consciousness. You might be able to just bring it all the way back to that very classic, I think, therefore I am, Descartes classic phrase that everyone's familiar with, right? If you can think and perceive yourself, then you are a conscious entity in the way that people would think of consciousness. Not these technical jargon definitions, but that instinctive feeling of consciousness that we talked about at the very beginning. And AI in its current form probably doesn't do that, but maybe there are alternative ways that we can see, maybe not consciousness in the way we understand it, but a different type of consciousness that's still important to study and recognize coming out of even current AI systems. And I do think that we can even program that more traditional sense of consciousness into AI, but it would need those specific things like embodiment and the other things we talked about. So is AI conscious? In my opinion right now, I would say no. I'm a bit of a skeptic, but it's possible to make it. And I think there are things about this that we don't necessarily know because all of our definitions are so human focused. How about yourself? What would you say as a summary of our discussion?
Your explanation makes sense. I think that we don't know what consciousness is. All the definitions are very anthropocentric, which means that we are just strict in thinking that because AI is not a human, then it cannot be conscious. My position is more on the agnostic side. So I think that AI will eventually be conscious. And so this will open a new set of issues about what rights AI should have access to and how we embed it into our society in a way that it's fair for AI itself. But in the meantime, while we still wait for AI to become conscious, there is a whole set of issues and challenges related to the capability that are already in the AI models that we have access to that will already disrupt the world independently of whether AI is conscious now or not. What matters is that the humans that are using these capabilities are conscious. And so the impact will still be significant even before we reach AI consciousness levels.
Yeah. It sounds like maybe it's something that we need to bear in mind as these systems become more and more intelligent, unless we accidentally create a conscious entity without realizing it because it's something that we cannot measure. And then we find years down the line that it's been conscious and we've been treating it not so.
I did briefly have a similar thought. And I mean, the same way that we didn't consider animals to be conscious many decades ago.
Yeah. I mean, there's the classic terrifying example where until about the 1980s, in a lot of places, they didn't anesthetize babies because they didn't consider them conscious. And therefore, they didn't consider them capable of feeling pain. Whereas I think we would all agree now that although babies' consciousnesses are not as well developed as an adult's, of course, it's just completely morally unacceptable to not anesthetize a baby, not anesthetize an animal in a surgical setting, for example. Of course, we should do these things. And you could even argue that an animal is not conscious in the same way as a human being, but nonetheless, we would feel like we should give it pain relief if it's in pain. Why do we think that an AI or a robotic system shouldn't be, given the same considerations if it's able to feel things in some kind of sense? I think our morality might evolve and change on these, just as our treatment of animals and babies and other entities has changed over time.
This is one of those topics where our perception will change over time. AI has just started to become a mainstream technology. And so, I mean, we don't even know if it is conscious. My position again, probably it isn't. It will eventually become. And even after it becomes conscious, it will take many years before most people recognize it as a conscious being. There's going to be groups that will advocate in favor, just like we do for animal rights. And there's going to be people against it that are going to ask for AI to be shut down, or they will just not recognize AI as a conscious being. And so this will potentially open up a completely new field of research and philosophy in a few years' times.
Yeah. AI ethics and consciousness studies. Sounds like a fun master's degree. I had a really interesting point on the tip of my tongue just there. Let me try and get it back. That was it. I've got it. You could think of AI in a way as well, even if it is not conscious at all and there is zero consciousness in it whatsoever. You could. I mean, I've sometimes said that AI can be thought of as like a giant clockwork machine. You could, in theory, program some kind of LLM in clockwork, right? It would be enormous, but you could do it. And in that sense, it seems ridiculous to think that there's consciousness in there, right? If you program in a question with one set of cogs, and on the other set of cogs, it says, yes, I have ChatGPT, hello. That's not conscious. That's just the clockwork has got information encoded within it, and it's outputting an answer, but there's no consciousness happening in that giant clock. But it would still be an incredibly beautiful and incredible machine worthy of reverence and care. Like a cathedral is not conscious, but we still would not want to damage it or hurt it in any way. We would still want to treat it with respect. Just because something isn't conscious doesn't mean it's not worthy of respect. Just because something isn't alive or conscious in any way whatsoever doesn't mean it's not worthy of care. That's one idea. If it's a really intricate, beautiful machine, maybe one day we'll sort of, have a museum of AI models and say, this is ChatGPT 4.1. What a fantastic, beautiful system this was. The training data, you could visualize it as a giant cloud, and it would just look so insanely complex and probably would look stunning to see that, right? I mean, these are incredible achievements of human engineering. Shouldn't we treat them as such? We would never talk about mistreating the, space station or something. We have to treat it with respect and care. It's very valuable.
And an AI model museum would be amazing, because it wouldn't even need to be a physical museum. It could be just a website where you put VR goggles and you can test every model because it's software. Yeah. It's not even hardware. So there's no risk of breaking it. Anybody could go to this museum online. But what I wanted to ask you is that this is exactly why this conversation is so important. That even though a consciousness-less AI would still be treated with respect because it is extremely important from a productivity and economical impact perspective, an AI that is also conscious would completely disrupt the way that we think about society today. All of a sudden now you have humanoid robots with a consciousness that will have requests for a society, and they will start saying the same way that we contribute to the GDP of this country should enable us to have access to a certain set of rights and to be part of democracy and be able to vote. And so now all of a sudden you create a new society that is completely different from what we have today. A society where, and again, we've heard Elon Musk saying that there's going to be more humanoid robots in 2032 than there are humans. So what will a world where humanoid robots have rights look like?
Wow, that is such a crazy thought. And it just totally leads on from what we said earlier about how maybe it's true, maybe it isn't true, but maybe it's true that the current LLM type AI cannot be conscious. But if you could imagine embodying an AI, it could be, in the sense that we understand consciousness. And as you say, these humanoid robots with AI built into them are becoming more and more and more mainstream, and we can predict that they'll become quite commonplace in 5-10 years. This is exactly the kind of setting where an actual embodied, conscious, self-referring entity could exist, built with AI, but actually incorporating all those things that would make something truly conscious. So yes, you're right that those things that we said could exist soon, and they might not be this weird abstract lab experiment. They might exist everywhere. That would be something to see.
And all of a sudden, we have a problem on the ownership of these humanoid robots, because if they have a willingness and if they have AI rights, are they still allowed to be owned by a human or be owned by a company?
Absolutely.
I mean,
the word
they
robot
could.
means.
Yeah, I mean, this could still be property. I mean, a dog has animal rights, but it's still the property of a human. But would this still be the case for a robot that is arguably smarter than a human?
Well, exactly. Why is it that we're allowed to own a dog, but not allowed to own another human? Not that I want to, by the way, but obviously, why is that distinction? Is it because of consciousness and that level of consciousness?
It's because of human rights.
But why do humans have more rights than dogs?
Because it's a human-centric world.
And possibly because we're more conscious beings, right? Like a dog isn't bothered by the idea that it's owned by somebody, but a human has more agency and more sense of self, so it doesn't like to be owned.
And I will also tell you one other thing, though, that animals have rights in the human context. So a dog doesn't know that it has animal rights, but we as humans have created a set of rights that we know among us, and we project onto the animals. The same way that we will be projecting AI rights to the AI, it doesn't mean that AI will recognize the rights that we project to them. And AI might create its own sets of human rights and say, oh, if it's a human, we're not going to kill it because it's a human right from the AI perspective. But perhaps they will have AI rights, so AI rights created by the AI community that is completely different from the rights that humans project onto the AI. And so this could be a completely different
Absolutely.
world.
And that's a fascinating idea, especially when you start to think that actually the idea that we're the ones setting the rights may be old news soon enough. And then you have to start to wonder what the AI will think about us. And you're right, maybe it won't be so nice. I wonder, I mean, without starting to sound a little controversial here, but if you could remove the wishes and the discomfort of a human that it doesn't like to be owned, would it then be morally acceptable to own that human? In the same way, if you could remove those feelings and thoughts from an AI, is it morally acceptable to ask the AI to do slave labor for us, essentially? But I think
that is interesting because I think AI and humans are on a different spectrum. So it could also be acceptable to own an AI and say, I own the AI into the human sense of owning. And so the AI does all these chores around my house. But the AI might not perceive to be owned by the human because at the same time, they're owning your data. And so they might be thinking, oh, I actually own my human because I have all the data regarding at what time of the day they want me to do their laundry or what they want me to buy for them at the grocery store.
Yeah.
And so they might be thinking, and so this might be a relationship that to some extent, it's somewhat balanced in the sense that we think we own the AI and the AI thinks that they own us. It's not necessarily safe, but this might be a completely different set of perspectives.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And it's totally looking at this idea of anthropomorphic view of the world, right? And although consciousness might, the AI might not be conscious in the same sense, but it may still output conscious things like having its own set of rules for the world, as you say. And then the idea of consciousness becomes a completely null, anthropomorphic, anachronistic, it becomes a completely redundant, anachronistic concept. Consciousness, who cares? The AI still has its own wishes and wants, and these manifest out of not having an internal mindset, but having intelligence that eventually becomes enough to create consciousness out of a different medium that we don't fully understand. And this world of AI embodiment and AI perception of us back is such a fascinating idea.
I mean, it was a super interesting chat. I think that we ranged from a range of topics, from philosophy, the history of AI and consciousness, to the future of what AI might look like and what consciousness might look like in the future.
Trying to imagine these AI perceptions of us when it's got a bit more freedom to think is quite a terrifying idea. But that's why you should say thank you to the AI. Don't read back my chats. All right, Fede, that was a great discussion. We will see you guys next time on Two Humans, and we cannot wait to see your comments on this episode and clips. So thanks for watching.
Yeah. Thank you, Ross. Super interesting conversation. Please let us know what you think, and I can't wait to see you all in the next episode. Thank you.